You think quick dinners started with microwaves and meal kits? Think again. Black mothers in the 1970s were already mastering fast, filling suppers after long shifts, turning pantry staples into soul food in 30 minutes flat. Let's dig into 30 quick recipes they perfected. Hogmaw stew was a dish that took something most would discard and transformed it into a centerpiece for the table. Hogmaw, the lining of a pig's stomach, was cleaned carefully, then stuffed with potatoes, onions, and spices before being simmered until tender. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply flavorful, stretching small amounts of ingredients into a meal that could feed an entire family. In times when money was scarce, Hogmaw stew allowed families to make use of what they had, proving that nothing from the animal went to waste. It was often served at gatherings where one pot had to go far, reminding everyone of the value of sharing and stretching food. The dish carried cultural roots tied to both survival and celebration, a reminder that even hard times could produce food that comforted and united. Hogmaw stew was not fancy, but it represented ingenuity, thrift, and strength in the face of want. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillies, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Pickled watermelon rind was a dish born out of a waste-not spirit. When families ate fresh watermelon, they saved the rinds, slicing off the tough green skin and brining the white flesh in vinegar, sugar, and spices. The result was a tangy, sweet pickle that could be eaten alongside meats, beans, or cornbread. In hard times, nothing edible was thrown away, and this recipe proved that even scraps could become something delicious. Pickled rind added brightness to plates that were otherwise heavy with starch and salt, lifting meals and making them feel more balanced. Children loved the odd flavor, and adults appreciated that it stretched food supplies further. Pickled watermelon rind became common in many Southern households, passed down as a recipe of ingenuity. It turned what was once destined for the trash into something cherished, embodying the creativity of Black families making do with what they had. Molasses milk drink was a common way to stretch both sweeteners and dairy during times of hardship. Hot milk, often reconstituted from powdered milk, was whisked with a spoonful of molasses until warm and smooth. The result was a drink that children could have before school or adults could sip before long workdays. It carried natural sweetness and important nutrients from molasses, while offering comfort when sugar was too costly to use. Families appreciated it because it was affordable, easy to prepare, and nourishing. Many children who grew up during lean times remembered this drink as both a treat and a necessity, even if they preferred chocolate or sugar when they could get it. The molasses milk drink proved that small substitutions could keep sweetness alive in daily life without breaking ration limits. It was simple, practical, and tied directly to the struggles of everyday survival, becoming a quiet but important memory of perseverance. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care. Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands. Mustard greens with ham hocks delivered bitter, peppery flavors that balanced the smoky pork perfectly while providing vitamins and minerals essential for health and sustained well-being. The greens were cleaned thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with ham hocks, onions, vinegar, and hot sauce until tender, but still maintaining some texture throughout. The bitterness mellowed during cooking, balanced by the pork's saltiness and the vinegar's tang, creating complex flavors that developed over hours of patient simmering. The potlikker was considered especially valuable, packed with vitamins leached from the greens and rich with pork flavor worth savoring. Families served this with cornbread and hot sauce, with children learning to appreciate the bitter notes that many initially resisted eating. In the 1970s, mustard greens grew easily in southern gardens and could be purchased cheaply at markets when homegrown weren't available for picking. Mustard greens with ham hocks represented Southern cooking wisdom, showing how proper preparation made even bitter vegetables into food people actually wanted to eat. Rumaki wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, Rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Ash cakes were one of the oldest and simplest forms of survival food, baked directly in the ashes of a fire. Cornmeal dough was shaped into patties, placed in hot embers, and brushed clean once cooked. They were smoky, rustic, and filling, often eaten with molasses or a bit of lard if available. Ash cakes reflected a time when ovens were not always accessible and fire was the only tool families had. They were practical and symbolic, tied to centuries of African American resilience and the resourceful use of corn. Families leaned on ash cakes during journeys, hard work days, and lean years, carrying both history and sustenance in every bite. Eating them meant returning to the most basic form of nourishment, stripped of luxury but full of meaning. Ash cakes were humble food that carried dignity, a reminder that even in the most limited circumstances, people found ways to survive and share. Pumpkin stew with onions was the kind of dish that proved homegrown vegetables could anchor a meal. Pumpkins were easy to plant, easy to store, and yielded enough flesh to keep a family fed for weeks. My grandmother peeled chunks of pumpkin, cooked them down with onions, and let the pot simmer until it turned thick and savory. The sweetness of the pumpkin mixed with the sharpness of onion, creating a balance that felt hearty and satisfying. Sometimes she added a little pepper or a leftover bone for extra flavor, but even plain, the stew was filling. Served with bread or cornbread, it was enough to feed a household without meat or costly ingredients. In the 1960s, pumpkins were not just for pies or holidays, they were staples, pulled from backyard gardens and turned into supper. The stew carried warmth, thrift, and creativity in every spoonful. Pumpkin stew with onions showed that survival did not mean going without taste, only learning to love what the land gave freely. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Oxtail stew transformed the tail of cattle into fall-off-the-bone tender meat swimming in rich, gelatinous gravy that coated everything perfectly when served over white rice. The oxtails were browned first to develop deep flavor, then slowly braised with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and red wine or broth for hours until the meat became incredibly tender and rich. The bones released collagen and marrow, thickening the sauce naturally and creating richness that couldn't be achieved any other way with cheaper ingredients. This wasn't quick food, but patient food, requiring hours of low heat to transform tough connective tissue into silky texture worth waiting for. Families served this on special occasions despite the humble ingredient because the preparation demanded time and attention that showed love clearly. In the 1970s, oxtails were considered throwaway cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for Black families who understood their potential for transformation into something special. The dish represented culinary alchemy, showing how time, technique, and patience could transform the least desirable cuts. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were. the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better. Pork fatback and cabbage was a skillet dish that showed how even scraps of pork could bring life to vegetables. Fatback, mostly fat with little meat, rendered down in a hot pan until it sizzled, releasing flavor into the cabbage. My grandmother would slice the cabbage thin and cook it until tender, soaking up the richness from the fat. The result was savory, smoky, and filling, even though it was made from ingredients most considered cheap or undesirable. Families paired it with cornbread or rice, stretching it further into a full supper. It was food that came from thrift, but it carried a taste that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Stewed okra and tomatoes were the kind of dish that took simple garden produce and turned it into something nourishing enough to feed a family. Okra, a vegetable with African origins, thrived in southern soil, while tomatoes grew easily in backyard gardens. Together, simmered slowly with onions, spices, and sometimes a scrap of salt pork, they created a stew that was tangy, savory, and thick. Families relied on it because it stretched small harvests into larger meals, often served over rice or with cornbread to make it filling. The dish was especially important when meat was too expensive to buy, as it added depth and nutrition without needing animal protein. Stewed okra and tomatoes became more than food. They were a way to survive with what the land provided. For many, the taste carried reminders of summer gardens and the hard work it took to keep families fed. It was frugal, delicious, and a perfect example of survival cooking. Fried chicken livers with hot sauce delivered iron-rich organ meat in forms that even children would eat, especially when coated in seasoned flour and fried crispy golden brown. The livers were soaked in buttermilk to remove any bitterness, dredged in flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, and cayenne, then fried quickly in hot oil until perfectly cooked. The result was crispy outside with creamy, almost mousse-like interior that melted in the mouth when cooked properly without overcooking into grainy texture. These provided concentrated nutrition, including iron, B vitamins, and protein in affordable packages costing less than $1 per pound at markets. Families served them as main dishes or snacks, with hot sauce being mandatory for many who loved the spicy, rich combination that made them addictive. In the 1970s, chicken livers were considered poor people's food that wealthier families avoided completely, meaning they stayed affordable and accessible for struggling families. Fried chicken livers represented nutritional wisdom disguised as soul food, proving that the cheapest cuts often delivered the most essential nutrients. Fried rabbit was a dish that came from necessity when families could not afford store-bought meat. Rabbits were plentiful in rural areas, and children often learned to hunt them with traps or small rifles. Once cleaned, the meat was seasoned, dredged in flour or cornmeal, and fried in hot lard until crisp. Rabbit meat was lean but tender, and it provided a valuable source of protein at no cost beyond effort. Families relied on it to fill gaps in their diets, especially during years when hogs or chickens were too expensive to raise in number. Fried rabbit was often served with potatoes or greens, turning it into a complete meal. It carried memories of resourcefulness, where survival was tied directly to skill and the land's offerings. For many, fried rabbit represented both struggle and pride, proof that families could take care of themselves when markets and money failed them. It was a food of resilience. Rice and molasses supper was one of the simplest meals, but also one of the most remembered. A pot of rice was inexpensive, filling, and always on hand, but paired with a drizzle of molasses, it turned into something sweet and sustaining. Sugar was too costly for everyday use, but molasses was affordable and sold in larger tins that seemed to last forever. Families poured it over steaming bowls of rice, letting the dark syrup seep into the grains until they gleamed. The taste was rich, almost smoky, with just enough sweetness to make children smile. It was often eaten at the end of the day when no meat could be spared, and it carried people through the night with enough strength to face the next morning. My grandmother told me rice and molasses was a treat disguised as necessity, proof that resourcefulness could soften the edge of scarcity. In the 1960s, when Black families were stretching every dollar, rice and molasses kept hunger at bay while still offering a touch of comfort. Simple, cheap, and unforgettable, it was a meal born of need but remembered with love. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special. Neckbones and potatoes simmered together became winter comfort food that warmed kitchens and filled bellies when cold weather made hunger feel even more desperate and urgent. Pork neck bones were browned first to develop flavor, then covered with water, potatoes, onions, and seasonings before simmering until meat fell from bones easily. The potatoes absorbed the porky richness, becoming creamy and flavorful while the meat turned silky and tender with hours of patient cooking. This one-pot meal required minimal attention once assembled, making it perfect for busy mothers managing multiple responsibilities throughout long days. The bones released gelatin and marrow into the broth, creating body and richness that made the dish feel more substantial than its simple ingredients suggested it would. In the 1970s, neck bones cost almost nothing per pound, and potatoes were among the cheapest vegetables available year-round in any market. Neck bones and potatoes represented making something from nothing, proving that the cheapest cuts combined with basic vegetables could create genuine comfort. Sweet potato bites topped with mini marshmallows were dessert-like appetizers that blurred the line between side dish and treat, their orange flesh and white topping creating visual appeal that drew children like magnets before dinner was served. Mothers would bake sweet potatoes until soft, then scoop out the flesh and mash it with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract until smooth and creamy. The sweetened sweet potato mixture was spooned into mini muffin tins or shaped into small balls and placed on baking sheets, each one topped with a single mini marshmallow that would toast golden brown. As they baked, the marshmallows puffed up and turned golden, creating that characteristic toasted flavor that children associated with campfires and summer fun. In the 1970s Black households, these bites represented creativity, taking traditional candied yams and reimagining them as finger foods children could grab. In the 1960s, fatback and cabbage was a reminder that flavor did not come from abundance, but from knowing how to cook with care. It was a dish that taught respect for every part of the animal and every leaf from the garden. Pork, fatback, and cabbage turned scraps into sustenance. Vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was one of the cleverest ways to turn leftovers into a comforting meal. My grandmother gathered whatever vegetables were left from the week, beans, carrots, peas, or turnips, and simmered them in a simple gravy. She poured the mixture into a dish and covered it with biscuit dough instead of pie crust, which baked into a golden, fluffy topping. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply satisfying, stretching scraps into something that felt like a Sunday supper. Each slice carried both thrift and comfort, a reminder that nothing from the kitchen was wasted. The biscuit crust gave the dish substance, making it a true dinner instead of just a side. In the 1960s, vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was common across homes that relied on ingenuity, turning odds and ends into meals that filled plates and warmed hearts. It was survival, wrapped in comfort. Food that told the story of resourceful families making the most of what they had. Souse, also known as head cheese, was a dish made from pig scraps that turned thrift into sustenance. The meat from a pig's head, including tongue and cheeks, was simmered, chopped, and set in a broth with vinegar and spices. Once cooled, it formed a terrine-like dish that could be sliced and served cold, usually with bread. Families valued it because it made use of parts of the hog that others ignored, ensuring that nothing edible was wasted. Souse carried tangy flavors from the vinegar and a dense texture that was filling and practical. Though not everyone loved it, those who grew up with it remembered it as a staple on the table during lean times. It represented survival and ingenuity, transforming scraps into something lasting. In households where every bite mattered, Souse stood as proof that determination and resourcefulness could make even the most overlooked cuts into meaningful food. Cream cheese and olive pinwheels, made with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and rolled in tortillas, created tangy, savory bites. Children found intriguing. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with finely chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a touch of garlic powder, spreading the mixture evenly on flour tortillas. The tortillas were rolled tightly, wrapped in plastic, and refrigerated for hours to firm up before being sliced into colorful pinwheels. Each slice revealed swirls of white cream cheese dotted with green olive pieces, creating visual appeal that drew children's attention. In 1970s, Black households, these pinwheels represented creative entertaining, showing how simple ingredients could become elegant appetizers. Children loved them because they were fun to look at, easy to eat, and introduced them to olives in a creamy format that made the vegetables more approachable and less intimidating than eating them whole. Catfish stew was a hearty dish that brought riverside living directly into the kitchen. Catfish was plentiful in southern waters and could be caught by hand or with simple nets, making it accessible to families with little money. The fish was simmered in a tomato-based broth with onions, peppers, and sometimes potatoes, creating a stew that was filling and flavorful. Served with rice or cornbread, it became a meal that could feed many people from just a few ingredients. Catfish stew represented more than thrift. It symbolized self-sufficiency and the ability to survive off the land and water. For Black families, it was also a dish tied to community, as fishing trips often brought people together. The stew carried smoky, tangy flavors that warmed the soul, reminding everyone at the table of home. In times of hardship, catfish stew was both sustenance and tradition, feeding generations with simple but powerful nourishment. Mustard greens with salt pork were the kind of dish that spoke to both thrift and tradition. Collard greens were loved, but when money was tight, mustard greens filled the pot just as well, with a sharper bite and a quicker cook. My grandmother simmered them slowly with scraps of salt pork, the fat melting into the broth until every leaf carried flavor. The kitchen smelled earthy, smoky, and strong, reminding everyone that even the humblest greens could feel like a feast when seasoned with care. She always said the broth, what some called potlikker, was the best part, soaking it up with cornbread to make sure not a drop was wasted. It was a dish that brought families together around the table, passing bowls and breaking bread even when meat was scarce. Salt pork was cheap because it was mostly fat, but it gave depth to every bite, transforming greens into comfort. In the 1960s, this was not just a side, it was supper, filling bellies after long days of work. Mustard greens with salt pork carried heritage, thrift, and resilience in one simmering pot. Salmon croquettes served as mini appetizers were crispy golden patties that children devoured while standing in kitchens, their hands reaching for more before finishing what they were already eating. Grandmothers would drain cans of pink salmon, carefully picking through the meat to remove bones and skin, then flaking the fish into mixing bowls where it was combined with chopped onions, bell peppers, beaten eggs, cornmeal, and seasonings. The mixture was shaped into small patties, pressed firmly to ensure they held together, then carefully lowered into hot oil where they sizzled and turned golden brown. The exterior developed a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. In 1970s, Black households' salmon croquettes were economical elegance, transforming canned fish into something special worthy of holiday tables. Children loved them because they were handheld, didn't require forks, and packed protein and flavor into every crispy bite. Pig ears boiled then fried transformed another discarded cut into crispy, gelatinous treats that appeared at gatherings and celebrations throughout Black communities nationwide during warm months. The ears were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then sliced into strips, breaded, and deep-fried until golden and crispy on the outside with satisfying crunch. The texture was unique, with crispy breading giving way to tender cartilage that had a satisfying chew unlike any other food available anywhere. These weren't everyday food, but special treats that showed up at fish fries, family reunions, and summer cookouts where people gathered to celebrate. The ears provided collagen and minerals while costing almost nothing per pound, since most butchers were happy to sell what they couldn't move otherwise to anyone. In the 1970s, pig ears represented nose-to-tail eating decades before it became fashionable in upscale restaurants charging premium prices. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and at what temperature to fry perfectly. Green tomato slices served with remoulade sauce were crispy, tangy bites that introduced children to Southern traditions, the cornmeal coating providing crunch while the tart tomato inside stayed firm and flavorful. Mothers would slice green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour and spices, then fry them in hot oil until golden brown and crispy. The remoulade sauce was made from mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, capers, and spices, creating a tangy, creamy dip that complemented the fried tomatoes perfectly. Each slice was served hot with a small dish of sauce for dipping, the combination of temperatures and textures making every bite interesting. In 1970s, Black households, fried green tomatoes represented end-of-season resourcefulness, using tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost to create something delicious. Children loved fried green tomatoes because they were crispy like French fries but tasted tangy and different, expanding their understanding of what vegetables could be. Sugar cane sticks were the simplest kind of sweetness, and they carried a special memory for children who grew up with little. Fresh cane was cut into sticks, peeled, and chewed for its sweet juice, offering a natural candy when refined sugar or store-bought treats were out of reach. For many children in the South, walking home with a stick of sugar cane was as good as holding a chocolate bar. It was affordable, long-lasting, and carried the earthy, raw sweetness of the land itself. Parents loved it because it kept children happy without costing much, and it taught the value of finding joy in small things. Sugar cane sticks carried the reminder that sweetness did not need to come from a store, but from fields worked by hand. They were part of the rhythm of rural life, tied to harvests and family memories. Even in the toughest years, sugar cane sticks brought happiness. Butter beans and rice were another cheap but comforting meal that carried families through lean times. Butter beans, with their creamy texture, were slow-cooked until tender, often flavored with a smoked ham hock or bone if one was available. The smoky taste infused the beans and created a rich broth that poured beautifully over rice. My grandmother used long-grain rice that stretched a pot of beans into enough servings for the whole household. The dish was hearty, filling, and nourishing, feeding both body and spirit. Butter beans were inexpensive compared to meat, yet they carried enough protein to keep families going strong. Children learned to appreciate the soft beans and flavorful broth as part of everyday meals, and adults recognized their value in stretching budgets. It was not a dish of extravagance but of practicality, a dinner that turned cheap staples into something people looked forward to. Butter beans and rice told the story of resilience in kitchens where every penny counted and every plate needed to satisfy. Butter beans cooked with ham hock and served in small cups became hearty appetizers that filled hungry children before dinner, their creamy texture and smoky flavor creating comfort in every spoonful. Grandmothers would simmer dried butter beans with ham hocks, onions, and seasonings for hours until the beans became tender and creamy while absorbing the smoky, salty flavor from the meat. The finished beans were served in small portions in cups or bowls with small spoons, allowing guests to enjoy them without needing plates. Some families topped the beans with crumbled cornbread or a drizzle of hot sauce for extra flavor and texture. In Black households during the 1970s, butter beans represented soul food tradition brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food could honor heritage while fitting modern entertaining formats. Children loved butter beans because they tasted familiar and comforting, like Thanksgiving dinner in miniature form that warmed them from the inside. Fried chicken wings, before they became trendy and expensive, were the discarded parts of chickens that Black families transformed into crispy, flavorful snacks and satisfying meals. The wings were seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, then fried until golden and crispy in hot oil or lard that made them absolutely delicious. The skin crisped perfectly while the small amount of meat stayed juicy, creating satisfying bites that disappeared quickly from plates at gatherings. These weren't considered premium food in the 1970s, when most people wanted breasts and thighs instead of bony wings nobody else wanted. That meant wings cost almost nothing per pound, sometimes given away free by butchers trying to clear inventory from coolers. Families made huge batches for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and white bread for perfect combinations. Fried chicken wings represented finding value in what others overlooked, transforming cheap cuts into genuinely delicious food that eventually became so popular they're now expensive. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Cornmeal batter cakes were one of the simplest meals that could appear on a Southern table, and they carried generations of tradition within them. Families would take cornmeal, water, and sometimes a pinch of salt, stir it into a thin batter, and fry it on a hot griddle until crisp at the edges. They were plain, but they filled stomachs and could be eaten with molasses, honey, or drippings if there was any to spare. For children heading to school or workers starting long days in the fields, these cakes offered quick energy without costing much. Cornmeal was one of the most dependable ingredients because it was cheap, easy to store, and produced in abundance across the South. A few scoops stretched further than wheat flour, and it did not require yeast or fancy preparation. Cornmeal batter cakes might have been plain, but in households facing hunger, they meant survival and warmth. They were a food that held families steady when little else did. Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange-gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch, extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans. Corn husk tamales in the Delta carried a story of adaptation and resilience, blending African-American creativity with Mexican influence. Families filled corn husks with seasoned cornmeal dough and sometimes small bits of pork or vegetables, then simmered them slowly until firm. They were portable, hearty, and could stretch a handful of ingredients into meals for many. In the Delta, these tamales became a community staple, often sold from wagons or small kitchens to neighbors who could not afford restaurant food. Wrapped in corn husks, they represented thrift and tradition, proof that families could borrow from other foodways and make it their own. Tamales were often shared at gatherings or passed around during long workdays, feeding both body and spirit. They carried the memory of cornfields and the smell of simmering pots, becoming part of African American culinary history. Delta tamales showed that even in hard times, food could carry flavor, heritage, and strength into the lives of those who needed it most. Stewed field peas with cornbread was a Southern staple that seemed to appear on tables no matter how hard times got. Field peas were inexpensive, easy to grow, and dried well enough to last through seasons, making them a dependable ingredient when other food was scarce. My grandmother simmered them slowly with onion, maybe a scrap of pork if any was left, until the peas broke down into a thick, savory stew. Cornbread was baked alongside, crumbly and warm, and served as the perfect companion, soaking up every bit of broth. Together they made a full meal, packed with enough substance to keep workers fed after long days in the fields or factories. Field peas were humble compared to black-eyed peas or butter beans, but they carried a taste of the land, earthy and comforting. For families with little money to spare, this pairing was dependable, stretching across generations as a dish of both necessity and pride. Stewed field peas with cornbread filled stomachs, warmed hearts, and reminded everyone that simple food could still be good food. Stuffed celery with cream cheese and pimento created colorful boats that children picked up by their crunchy handles, the creamy filling contrasting perfectly with the crisp, fresh vegetable that provided texture amidst holiday indulgence. Mothers would wash and trim celery stalks, cutting them into 3-inch lengths before drying them thoroughly and arranging them on serving platters like little canoes. The filling was made by beating cream cheese until fluffy, then folding in diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings like garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper. The cream cheese mixture was spread generously into each celery groove, mounded slightly and sometimes garnished with paprika, chopped olives, or crispy bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, stuffed celery represented an attempt to include something fresh among heavier holiday offerings. Children loved them because the cream cheese provided richness while celery added refreshing crunch. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes created summer dishes that combined fresh vegetables with smoked pork in ways that made even vegetable-hating children clean their plates completely. Fresh or frozen lima beans were simmered with ham pieces, tomatoes, onions, and peppers until the beans were creamy and the tomatoes had broken down into sauce coating everything. The acidity from tomatoes balanced the beans' starchiness, while the ham added smokiness and salt that brought all flavors together into cohesive whole. This one-pot meal required minimal supervision once assembled, making it perfect for hot summer days when standing over stoves felt absolutely unbearable. The dish was nutritious and filling, providing protein, fiber, and vitamins all in one bowl served over rice for complete meals. In the 1970s, lima beans were garden staples that families grew themselves or purchased frozen in bulk economically at stores. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes represented seasonal cooking and the satisfaction of eating fresh produce prepared simply but deliciously. Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black households smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was a clever twist on an old classic that fit the budget of Black families in the 1960s. Instead of pricey white potatoes, sweet potatoes from the garden were boiled, mashed, and spread on top of a filling made from scraps of meat and vegetables. My grandmother would use whatever was left, bits of beef, chicken, or even pork, chopped small and cooked with onions, carrots, or peas until it formed a savory base. The sweet potato topping baked into a golden layer that balanced the salty meat with a touch of natural sweetness. It was hearty enough to fill everyone, but cheap enough to make even during lean weeks. Sweet potatoes were plentiful in many southern gardens, and they stretched farther than most vegetables because they were filling and rich in flavor. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was more than just food. It was a statement of ingenuity. Families made do with what they had and still put something warm and comforting on the table. That golden crust represented thrift and care, carrying both survival and love in every spoonful. Cowtail soup was a rustic dish that turned overlooked parts of the animal into a rich, sustaining meal. Families would simmer ox or cow tails for hours until the broth thickened, drawing out deep flavors from the bones and marrow. Vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes were added when available, creating a stew that was filling and full of nutrients. Cowtail soup was a dish of patience, requiring time but rewarding households with warmth and nourishment that could last days. It carried a strong, hearty flavor that reminded families of home cooking, even in years when food was scarce. Because tails were cheaper than prime cuts, they became an accessible protein source for families who could not afford much. The soup symbolized frugality and resourcefulness, proving that even bones could be transformed into meals that held people together. Cowtail soup was more than broth. It was the taste of resilience in hard times. Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Smoked turkey necks with beans were a dish that carried deep, smoky flavor into a pot of humble legumes. Turkey necks were affordable and often overlooked at markets, making them perfect for families who needed cheap protein. Simmered slowly with beans, onions, and peppers, the necks released flavor that transformed plain beans into a rich, hearty stew. The meat could be picked from the bones and mixed back in, ensuring that nothing was wasted. This dish was particularly popular in the South, where smoked meats were prized for their ability to season large pots of food. Served with cornbread, it provided warmth and satisfaction that carried families through long days. Smoked turkey necks with beans became a reminder that flavor did not depend on expensive cuts, but on patience and tradition. It was food that spoke to both survival and comfort, feeding bodies and spirits in difficult years. Cornbread dressing made from scratch became holiday tradition that stretched expensive turkey into meals feeding extended families gathering from across cities and states for celebration. Day-old cornbread was crumbled and mixed with sautéed onions, celery, sage, chicken broth, and eggs, then baked until golden on top and creamy inside with perfect texture. This wasn't stuffing cooked inside the bird, but southern dressing baked separately in pans, allowing better control over texture and flavor throughout. The cornbread absorbed the broth and seasonings, becoming savory and moist with crispy edges that everyone fought over at dinner tables. Families made huge pans because this was as important as the turkey itself, sometimes more important given its cultural significance to gatherings. In the 1970s, cornmeal was cheap enough that making cornbread for dressing didn't stress budgets even during expensive holiday meals celebrated properly. Each family had their own variations, with recipes guarded and passed down through generations of women who took pride in their dressing. Coconut cake was the tall white winter bright dessert covered in soft flakes that clung to the frosting like new fallen snow, making it one of the most beautiful desserts on any reunion table. The cake layers baked into soft, tender rounds that held moisture well, especially when brushed lightly with sweet coconut milk or simple syrup to deepen the flavor. The frosting was smooth and fluffy, often made from cooked icing or whipped cream cheese depending on the family recipe, and once spread across the cake, it formed the perfect base for the final snowy coating. Handfuls of coconut were pressed gently against the sides, falling lightly across the top until the cake looked like something crafted for celebration. Its flavor was light sweet and refreshing, offering a cool softness that balanced the heavier, richer desserts around it. Coconut cake tasted like reunions. Church gatherings and holidays rolled into one dessert as children reached for it, first drawn to the snowy look while adults reached for it last, wanting to savor the gentle sweetness. Sweet potato biscuits with honey were a beloved comfort food that turned humble ingredients into something special. Sweet potatoes were plentiful in the South, cheap to grow, and full of natural sweetness. By mashing them into biscuit dough, families created soft, tender breads that did not require as much flour or fat. Fresh biscuits out of the oven were topped with a drizzle of local honey if it was available, making them feel indulgent despite their simplicity. These biscuits were often served for breakfast, but they could also accompany stews or fried fish. They filled stomachs and brought warmth to the table, offering both nutrition and comfort. Sweet potatoes symbolized resilience, and honey added a touch of hope in difficult times. Together, they created a dish that carried meaning well beyond its taste. Sweet potato biscuits with honey reflected the heart of soul food, making something beautiful and memorable from ingredients that were always within reach. Cheese ball, rolled in pecans, sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown-up and independent. Red rice with sausage brought Gullah traditions into urban Black kitchens, creating one-pot meals that combined African cooking techniques with American ingredients in uniquely flavorful and satisfying ways. Long grain rice was cooked with smoked sausage, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and spices until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned deep red throughout. The dish was savory, slightly spicy, and deeply satisfying, with each grain of rice coated in tomato richness and sausage fat for maximum flavor. This wasn't just food, but cultural heritage, connecting coastal African Americans to West African jollof rice through centuries of adaptation and survival across oceans. Families served this at celebrations, church dinners, and regular weeknight meals when rice and sausage were all the budget allowed for feeding everyone. In the 1970s, rice was among the cheapest starches available, and smoked sausage provided maximum flavor from minimal meat for economical cooking. Red rice with sausage represented cultural continuity and African heritage, surviving through food traditions that connected past to present. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form. Pig ear sandwiches were another example of how Black families wasted nothing and found flavor where others saw scraps. Pig ears, which butchers often sold cheaply, were boiled until tender, then sliced thin and placed between bread with mustard or hot sauce. The texture was chewy, but the taste was rich and savory, making them surprisingly satisfying. For many, these sandwiches became a dependable lunch or supper when more expensive meats were out of reach. They were especially common in rural towns where hogs were butchered at home and every part of the animal was used. Families knew that wasting nothing was not just thrifty, it was survival. Eating pig ears was also a mark of resilience, turning overlooked cuts into a food that people grew to enjoy. Today, pig ear sandwiches are remembered as a dish born from necessity, but filled with pride, showing just how much strength could be found in the humblest of meals. Fried bream with hush puppies was a meal born from rivers, ponds, and hands that knew how to fish. Bream, small and plentiful, cost little more than the time spent catching them. My grandmother cleaned the fish, rolled them in cornmeal, and fried them crisp in hot oil until the skin crackled golden brown. Hush puppies bubbled alongside, little cornmeal fritters that were cheap to mix and cooked quickly. Together, they made a dinner that felt rich without draining a wallet. Families gathered around plates piled high, dipping hush puppies into hot sauce or eating them plain while the fish cooled. The taste was pure Southern tradition, simple, salty, and tied to the land and water. In the 1960s, when grocery stores were expensive, fishing poles and cast nets provided meals for families who had little to spare. Fried bream with hush puppies was more than food. It was a reminder of resourcefulness and community, where the catch of the day fed everyone at the table. Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form. Peach preserves with biscuits brought the sweetness of summer into the cold months of winter. Families would boil down ripe peaches with sugar until thick, sealing them in jars to last through the year. Spread over hot biscuits, the preserves offered both comfort and nourishment when fresh fruit was long gone. Canning peaches was a yearly ritual, tying families to the cycles of the land and the rhythm of harvest. It required time and patience, but the reward was sweetness that carried through the hardest seasons. Biscuits were a perfect partner, soft, warm, and filling, making peach preserves a special treat that brightened tables. For children, it was a taste of abundance in months of scarcity, a reminder that summer fruit could still be enjoyed when snow or frost covered the fields. Peach preserves with biscuits were both practical and emotional, offering joy from jars of hard work. They carried hope through cold winters. Which after-work meal from your childhood still calls to you? Share your memories in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe so we can keep bringing back the flavors that fed hardworking families through the 1970s.